Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Alter Your Health podcast, your source of information and inspiration to promote the holistic transformation of your health and the health of our planet. Today we're diving into yet another new topic. That's what I love about this podcast, is that we can dive deep into many different things, not all at once, but individually, to gain a better understanding of how to achieve health and wellness on an individual and collective level. So our guest today is an expert in the world of plants. That's herbs and botanicals, as we distinguish today. Herbs have kind of encapsulated everything around cannabis and that specific plant, while botanical medicine, of course, encompasses all other plants that can be used medicinally. So our conversation today dives into the use of cannabis for health and healing, as well as many other plants. So I'm excited to share this conversation with Dr. Glen Nagel, who was my botanical medicine professor, and he has been a practicing herbalist and naturopathic doctor, and what he calls himself an all-around herbal wise guy for the last 30 years. His background as an herbalist began in the early 1980s, as he was one of the first herbal apprentices with Herbal Ed Smith and Sarah Katz, who are the founder of Herb Farm. You might recognize Herb Farm as being one of the common tinctures that are sold at a lot of health food stores. He also studied with the seaweed expert Ryan Drum, as well as a wise woman, Cascade Anderson Geller. And he worked in the herbal industry as an herbal educator, offering classes and courses in herbal medicine. He's a licensed naturopathic doctor in Oregon and has practiced naturopathic medicine since graduating from the National College of Natural Medicine in 1993. Now, of course, National University of Natural Medicine, where he continues to teach botanical medicine, in addition to teaching at Bastyr University up in Kenmore, Washington. He has a lifelong interest in plants and nature and believes that it's best to be teaching with humor and hands-on experience, which is something that he definitely does in his courses, both in the classroom as well out in the woods, harvesting and identifying herbs and learning about herbs in a hands-on kind of relational sort of way. I also really appreciate Dr. Nagel's connection with plants and herbs in a culinary sort of way. He likes to infuse herbs into drinks and food. And in our conversation, you can see, if you're watching the video, you can see that we're enjoying a very nice beverage that he prepared for us, an herbal flower elixir with ginger foam. So it was a good one. I loved the conversation. I loved the drink, and I loved the time shared with Dr. Glen Nagel. Just to note that this conversation was recorded outside on the beautiful patio. We didn't foresee the leaf blowers that would be going almost constantly in the background. So I'm sorry if some of that background noise was picked up on the audio. It got a little bit noisy on our end right in the middle of the conversation, but hopefully it's not too bad throughout the rest of it. So just wanted to forewarn you on that quick point. Before we dive in, just want to remind you, wherever you're tuning in from, whether it's iTunes or YouTube or whatever other platform, if you could subscribe and leave a brief review, I would so appreciate it. It really helps what we're doing here. And without further ado, why don't we just all sit back and relax and enjoy this conversation with Dr. Glen Nagel. Welcome to the Alter Your Health podcast. That's the name of this podcast. And I am Benjamin Alter, and you are Dr. Glen Nagel.
Yes.
And I've had the privilege of sitting through a number of hours of your entertainment on the side of herbal wisdom and teachings. And I'm excited to sit down and go a little bit deeper into different things as well. So first, why don't you just share who you are and how you've come into the field of naturopathic medicine, and then honing in on herbs and plants.
Well, the background really is fascinating, because I think, we all move with our skills. And so, I was undergraduate. I was studying outdoor education because I was trying to get credit for hiking and camping. And so I had this outdoor education degree. And I really got fascinated by botany and plants and started studying. And identifying plants, and I just got bit by the herb bug because, like, plants had all these stories and this wisdom. And so I started studying herbalism after college, and I ended up getting an apprenticeship with Herbal Ed Smith, which herb farm, and I just opened my world. This was in the early 80s, and then after that I got a job with some herb companies, and then eventually I was in Portland, and the Naturopathic School was where Eclectic Institute had their offices, and so I met naturopaths, and I was like, well, if you wanted to be a clinical herbalist, that was the only path, the legal path.
Yeah, is that still true today? I mean, in terms
Yeah,
of
no,
clinical
herbalist has no
herbalism?
status in this country. You could be an herbalist and you don't need a license, but technically you can't diagnose and treat.
Right.
You can just support their health.
You can kind of just recommend herbs.
Right. And so for me, it was like, oh, I studied herbs long enough. I thought, being a naturopathic doctor gives me the credibility to practice herbalism, and it seemed like a path that was presented because I was like at the school, and the year I started was the second year they got student loans. So
Wow.
It seemed like, oh, I can borrow to get this to happen, and
Now it's all downhill from there.
yeah, no, it's all downhill from there. So
Cool.
So I studied and graduated, and I always had an herbal focus, and it's gone in various ways. And I think the thing that I feel good about my 25 years as a naturopath is that I really have a diversity of, I've clinically practiced for about 12 years full time, and then I've worked in the herbal industry for about 10 years full time, on and off, and I've been an educator for almost 10 years. And so that kind of ability to do a little bit of everything is kind of naturopathy at its core.
Yeah.
Jack of all, master of none, or as I like to tell the students, jack of all, master of one when you graduate.
Yeah, you definitely have had a diverse professional career as a naturopathic doctor, spanning between the clinic, academia, and now you're fully focused at Herb Farm. So what's your shtick now?
Well, my shtick now is I'm kind of an independent. I mean, I'm kind of remaking myself after doing all this. I was working full time for Herb Farm, and now I've transitioned to kind of doing consulting for some of the herb industry, and I'm focused on working with colleagues to do a cannabis company.
Cool. Could you say more about that, or not? Maybe not
I
yet.
could just give some preliminaries, but
Yeah.
the concept that I really think of is if you look at what's going to take herbal medicine into the future, right? And it's the concept that one of the things about cannabis is that it has all the press now. It has all the awareness. Everybody knows what CBD is, right? Everybody's aware of it. And we live in Oregon, and it's legal medical and legal recreational. And there's an industry where this is becoming legit. And so one of my focuses is they need more herb people in the cannabis world.
Yeah, less cannabis people and more herb people.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's a diverse, growing industry, and it's like it's kind of like home contracting. Like half just got out of jail and half should be in jail. No, that's the joke. But it's kind of the Wild West, and so my concept is it's a plant, centuries old, that has been sustained by knowledge, by hippies, by culture.
Yeah.
And so much like turmeric or green tea, there's a lot there, and it's not smoke and mirrors. Well, there's a little smoke.
There's a little smoke, not so much mirrors. Yeah.
And so looking at what I see is like, we need to take a perspective of like, this is a plant that has these kinds of constituents. I think the interesting thing is that it's being legitimized by science and by research, but it's also, because of federal restrictions, illegal federally.
Yeah.
And so it creates this kind of loophole where it's legal in some places but federally illegal. And that only draws the interesting entrepreneurs, the small people. And so the team that I'm working with to develop this business, we can get into it because it is federally illegal. And so small groups of people can risk their time and money to try to make something, whereas the big people are on the sidelines now waiting for where it's legal. And I know, having worked with legal herb companies, and I like to separate them now, I can say herbalism, herb is cannabis, and botanicals is everything else.
Say that one more time.
So
for
when
me.
you say herb, everybody knows, oh, it's cannabis. So herbal medicine, I think of as cannabis medicine. Botanical medicine is everything else.
Okay.
And I've just highlighted
Yeah.
it because, in a way, cannabis has stolen the herbal with the green cross.
Totally. I mean, and I think there's maybe potential good and bad from this. You know, like you were saying, it's totally in the spotlight of the press and everything. And sometimes I wonder if it could be like a platform to grow and to expand upon in terms of legitimizing the use of other herbs in the world. What are your thoughts on
No,
that?
I think that's what got me interested in. I mean, I'm an herb person, and all herbs have their role. And what I see happening with cannabis in Portland, as an example, is somebody told me the other day there's 402 cannabis shops in Portland.
Is that all?
Is that all? Yeah.
I mean, they must be right around here, you know?
And there's like 6 herb shops that I know of,
Yeah.
that sell botanicals, that don't sell cannabis. And I'm
Right.
like, okay, that seems a little bit skewed, meaning it's all a perspective of continuum from black and white, right? And so that how does the cannabis mix in with other herbs? And so we know that cannabis can be very helpful for relaxation, and CBD heavy strains have a profound effect on cognition and stress and anxiety. But kava works too,
Yeah.
and passion flower leaf works too, and
sure.
chamomile works too. And so that's from the strongest to the mildest.
Yeah.
If you walk into a cannabis shop, they're going to sell you the hammer. And as a clinician and a naturopath, I'm like, maybe you just need a little massage and some gentle herbs. And so that continuum is this idea that all herbs have value. It's just we have to make the judgment on which way do we want to start. We want to start with the strongest. And so a lot of people go into cannabis shops, and the experience for some people that I've heard is that especially novices, the seniors, the people that are new, they come in with problems, and they can have a bad experience, and they can be out of the like you can get too high, you can get too much of something.
Sure. Too much of a good thing. Yeah.
It can drop people off. And so I look at all these herb shops and think, the cannabis shops, the numbers are gonna go down just because there's saturation. And what is going to happen if they diversify, if they work with people? And I think the analogy is like liquor stores. In Oregon, we have liquor stores. You have to go there, state run. And liquor's been around for a long time. Everybody has a liquor store. Every family has a liquor store. Great uncle, uncles, aunts, everybody has a story about alcohol, good or bad. With cannabis, there's kind of a blank slate. A lot of people don't have stories. And if you look at the regulation of alcohol, I mean, it's gone through the model where now you go into the stores and it's all regulated. Lowest on the bottom, most expensive on the top. It's all 40% pretty much alcohol. You grab what you want and you try to get out of there as quickly as possible. And so cannabis is in that realm now. Do we move to that same place? Or do we use, I think, education and awareness and understanding of plant chemistry to try to manipulate and work so that people can understand the range of aspects of healing that cannabis can bring? And so the bud tenders and the people in the store that I've talked to, they're really the front line of like, do you just give people what they want to get high, or do you educate them on the medicinal aspect? And this is all going to be played out in the next 15, 20 years, because eventually it's going to be commoditized as an industry. It's going to be an industry, and the industry is going to say, this is what we're going to sell. And so there is this pushback to try to keep it local and keep it organic and keep things as the craft cannabis industry is versus the industrial version. And alcohol's kind of shown us the way. And so the OLCC, Oregon Liquor Control Commission, monitors that here. And so is it going to parallel that track, or is it going to take a broader track? And our cannabis centers going to be more like clinics and healing centers than they are like dispensaries for a drug?
Sure. I definitely want to wrap back around and dive a little bit more into cannabis, but first I want to, that's not what this whole talk is on. Like you already made the distinction. Cannabis is kind of the herb, and botanical medicine is everything else. So when it comes to botanical medicine, one question that I am kind of faced with often, both like by others and also kind of bubbling up inside of me, even after naturopathic education and everything, is like, do the herbs really work, and do they work as well as other things that could be used therapeutically?
Yeah, no, I've been studying this a long time, and clinically worked with patients with herbs. And what I'm coming down to with botanical medicine and herbal medicine and the non-potent herbs, what we would call the tonic herbs, which is pretty much the ones that can safely be used,
like the
elderflower and the echinacea. I really think it's all about what I would call nudge medicine. That they nudge you in a naturopathic model as a pillar for health. You take the right diet, the exercise, attitude, some herbs or supplements, and they nudge you with the vital force back. Some herbs are much stronger, like from the cannabis and the kava realm, but most of the herbs are just nudging us and moving us in the direction and supporting us. You think about that support model. So taking them over a period of time, combining with other things, and people can feel transformed. Now, if you study them clinically, and there's more and more research coming out about botanical medicine, but the research oftentimes is focused on herbs as a drug. And I think that's where some of the mistake is made, because when you look at research, whether it's echinacea or ginkgo, it always goes down to what did they use in the study? And it has to be quantified. And this is the place where it breaks it down into chemistry, and plants have hundreds of compounds, if not thousands of compounds per plant. And how do we determine which ones are the active? And so we make this game that humans like to do of saying, well, these are so-called actives. These are the things we're concentrating. And a great example in the herbal world is something like ginkgo. Ginkgo's been studied for 40 years. The Germans really brought it into prominence, and they used the ginkgo extract, and it was the 24/6. That means they were standardized for 24% flavonoids and 6% terpenes, and that's what the studies were done on. And so when you look at a ginkgo study for tinnitus, or you look at a ginkgo study for circulation and brain health, it's with the standardized extract, which is kind of a potentized herbal extract, meaning it's kind of a plant drug.
Right.
And so if you just take some ginkgo leaves and make tea out of it, you're not nearly going to get the strength of that. And so in some cases, if you're going to get the benefit of ginkgo, you have to use what they used. And so everything depends on what they're using. And so a lot of the early herb studies just had, dried herb, and they didn't quantify it. And I think this is where the science is coming together with botanicals and cannabis, is that it's all about the testing. What do you have there? What are the strains? What are the different components? And that's kind of leaking a little bit into herbal medicine now, because in botanical medicine, there's something like dandelion, and it's just roots, and you can make extracts, and has never really been quantified for actives. I like to think of them as actives. I don't like to think of them as the only thing in there, but the actives are the marker compounds, or I like to think of them as fingerprints. Each herb has a fingerprint of maybe 3 to 7 compounds that, if you find in there, are determined to make it high quality, and maybe the key things what works. Everything has a synergist effect, or like they call it now, the entourage effect. It's kind of who you hang out with that's really important, not just one strong personality, but the group. Yeah. And so all these plants now have these entourage effects, and so we're getting to see that with plant medicine, botanical medicine, that we're looking more at the chemistry and saying, do we have, like kava has 6 noble kava lactones, and those 6 noble are the components that are found in a kava extract. And if you don't have the 6 noble, you probably have something that's not considered to be therapeutic and safe for the market. And so people want to see, oh, that's what you have. That's been tested. That's been quantified.
Yeah, so it almost sounds like there's 2 branches of botanical medicine. There's kind of the plants, and just using plants as nudging medicine gently, and then there's the plant drugs, which are the constituents that are isolated and compounded and, put together in higher dose and used to treat a disease, like specifically in kind of, I don't know, the green allopathic sort of way, just symptom treatment.
I like to think of it as like three ways you can look at plants and concentrations. Is that there's what's called the crude native extracts. And native extracts are like something you can do at home, meaning I can make a tea out of a dried herb. I can eat fresh herb. I could put the dried herb or fresh herb in alcohol or glycerin or water and extract it and make something that is a crude, takes what it dissolves in there and gives it to you. It's not quantified in any way. And then there's so-called standardized extracts, where they take a certain amount of herb and oftentimes use some type of solvent system that's beyond the scope of what you have at home, and CO2 or other solvents, and they concentrate components, and then they assay them and then label claim them as the 24/6 ginkgo or 95% curcuminoid or curcumins in turmeric, and that's sold as a standardized extract. And then the next step is the isolated extract. And a good example of that is like berberine sulfate. You process massive amounts of low berberine containing plants. You isolate it into a berberine salt, berberine sulfate. You quantify it, you isolate it, you package it, and you label it, and it's one component, and that's become an herbal drug, naturally sourced. So if you pick up whatever you have with an herbal product and look at it, decide, is it a native extract, is it a standardized extract, or is it an isolated extract? And as you go up the list, and this is all from Dr. Francis Brinker, a naturopathic, who wrote this in a book, 2004. And I like it because it kind of quantifies, as you go up the list, you have more potential for side effects, and more mono components may have strong activity, but potential for side effects. And so if you look at the crude native extracts, have lots of components and lots of potential action, but it's often gentle and without side effects. And as we go up the list, and so you kind of look at clinically, the model is, I want to use, some patient came in with hepatitis C, I'm going to use a standardized European sourced milk thistle extract, because that's what the research has shown, and it's kind of like they need the herbal drug level. Mm-hmm. If I just give them milk thistle seeds, that's more of a wellness approach. Somebody like you or me that are just trying to tweak our health.
Got it. So if I'm understanding you correctly, all of these levels have their place in the world. So it's not a matter of this being better than, the crude extract and the whole plant being better than the constituents. It's just a matter of what your goal is, what your intention is with the plants.
Right. I think one of the things, anybody that has been in any clinical practice, especially natural medicine, naturopathy, herbalism, is you want to really have a broad perspective and rule nothing out. I mean, I think one of the challenges in naturopathic practice is people would come in with serious health problems, and they would want you to just give them herbs and remedies and cure them. And I'm like, your experience would be, as a practitioner, my experience would be, that's not going to cut it. Like maybe you need another intervention. But, I don't want drugs and surgery. And I agree, that's a great place to start. But eventually, maybe something like that can be helpful. And so don't throw it off your table. Like, keep everything there and start from the most safe and natural and go up. Right. And so I think a lot of times practitioners patients have unrealistic expectations that, I think of a patient I had breast cancer, and it was just a mass on her breast, and it was open, and it was weeping, and it's like, can you just give me herbs for this? And I'm thinking, no. This is beyond the scope of herbs. And so having unrealistic expectations, you don't want to squash that, because that's the power of healing, hope. And I remember one practitioners that I worked with, they were a medical person, and they were like, well, you're giving people false sense of hope. And I'm like, well, if you think it's going to help and the patient thinks it's going to help, then that's hope.
There's nothing false
about it. And there's nothing false about it.
Yeah.
It's not an abusive hope. You're not, and this idea that naturopaths or other practitioners are economically benefiting from what they're doing. I mean, if you've done it for a living, you'll be laughing at it, because it's like, you can make a living at it, but it's not like anybody's getting rich and retiring on false cures, right? If it works, it works. If it doesn't work,
Yeah, that's a really good point. So could you talk a little bit now about how herbs work?
well,
Some examples of mechanisms, because you talked a little bit about the constituents and then the whole plant and synergy, and I know it's so out of this world, like wrapping our studying it in effect is by nature reductionistic, and we can't really grasp the whole realm of what's going on. But what do we know in terms of how herbs
well,
work?
we know that the plant components have been around a long time. And how they heal, I remember when I taught Bot Med 1 at NUNM, I always started the class with a little small discussion, and I'm like, how do plants heal? Because we have to get the paradigm model of, like, how do they work? And there is no right or wrong answers. They can heal you from having chemistry. They can heal you from having nutrients. So you just think of tonic herbs. There's proteins and fibers and carbohydrates that build your body, the antioxidants that are in there. The chemistry, like a great example would be like terpenes, like mint oil. It's going to have menthol. And if you think about the terpenes on the plant, they're on the outside, and they're pretty much more fat soluble than water soluble. And when you absorb terpenes, the monoterpenes especially are very small and aromatic, and so when you swallow them, they worm their way right through your digestive tract and into the bloodstream or into the respiratory tract. And so if you think about all our spices are terpenes, right? Oregano and cinnamon, and the terpenes are really a focus of research because we know they're absorbed really quickly. And the model that I have is they absorb right into the intestinal lining and the stomach lining, and as they go through there, they can be carminative because they kind of poke holes in the digestive tract and allow gas and bloating to get out. They also calm the membrane from being spasmodic, and so they work for antispasmodic action. And so if you think about quick acting, all the aromatic plants, essential oils and teas and oil extracts of that, they work through pushing these terpenes into the bloodstream and calming. So that's a very immediate effect.
Yeah, that's. I mean, yeah, that's a great example because a lot of these herbs, they other classes of herbs kind of need to build up in the system, and you have to have, and it's this kind of days to weeks to months sort of slow gradual thing. So what are some examples of those kind of herbs that
I think
don't have the immediate?
The ones that I've been studying, like I've been working a lot with ashwagandha and has with thanolides, and the withanolides have an adrenal supportive effect. They're energizing but also relaxing, and the adaptogens are really interesting compounds. They tend to be saponin in nature. Saponins are soap-like molecules, and so if you think about soap, it's foaming in its nature, and so saponins have an ability to be cleansers. But these saponins and the adaptogens is a Russian word that was coined for something that's non-toxic, that given in low doses over a long period of time has an effect that it helps the system adapt to stresses. And so if you think about, it can raise or lower stress hormones depending on the individual. And so in some ways, we talk about compounds that have plant wisdom that interact with our body and allow our body to do different things with them. And so the adaptogens, because they're tonic, they don't do anything after one dose. Like ashwagandha, people have to take it for a week or two, up to 3 months to feel its benefits. Whereas kava, you could take it and 10 seconds later, you're going to feel calm and relaxed.
But I feel like I have had an experience of taking Eleutherococcus at nighttime and feeling stimulated. Was that my mind playing tricks on me?
No, everybody's unique to how they respond to that. And I think one of the things when you take alcoholic tinctures, the alcohol is the driving agent, just like having a gin and tonic, it drives whatever's in that glass into your bloodstream. And the tinctures go in very quick. And so some people have a stimulating effect because there's alcohol in there. And the herb can get in, and some people can have an effect right away. I mean, it's not something that it's commonly experienced, but...
Yeah. So it seems like another important thing is setting realistic expectations of what herbs will do, not expecting, like you're saying, just a one-dose cure from or what, a few drops a day for a few days, and just voila.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you can also leave open the idea. So we talked about chemistry affecting your physiology. And this is a dosing model that I have taught of the three different. There's pharmacological dosing, where you take an herb in large enough things to have an effect. So these compounds in the terpenes go in, relax the muscles, and they absorb gas, and so you're feeling better. There's physiological dosing. So you get nutrients from herbs, you get vitamins, you get compounds that build your health, like magnesium and calcium. Almost any green plant made into tea, so nettle tea or alfalfa tea, if you think of it, it's pretty much a potassium broth. So any green plant, green tea especially, it's a potassium broth. Your body needs potassium, it's energizing. And so that's like physiological response. You're getting things that build your physiology. And then the last effect is kind of I would call hormetic, the low dose or homeopathic. Hormetic is more of a medical model, meaning your body responds to ultra low doses in a way that's not to be predicted. Stimulating effect, sometimes from a super small. And so in homeopathy, there's a lot of controversies, but hormesis has been studied really well by this guy Calabrese. And the idea that I remember one study, it said like maybe up to 2 or 3, 4 cigarettes a day have a stimulating effect on your health, because the toxins cause the body to upregulate your cleansing of your lung. And so that people had a beneficial effect, not a negative. So that's kind of the hormesis effect.
It's very interesting. I've heard similar studies about radiation exposure kind of being invigorating to the system. I mean, we think about radiation being like a poison, a toxin, and it's all about the dose.
I remember we lived in Montana, and they have health mines, and you'd go down in these old mines, and there'd be card tables, and you sit around, and they're low-level radiation. And you would stay down there, and the old people would have significant benefit from joint pain. And it was monitored by the state. You had to wear a little button, and I can't remember the levels, but that's that model. And so if you think about that, anybody can take. There are herbalists, colleagues of mine, that give 2 or 3 drops of an herb, and they can get physiological effects. And so some people would call that magical. And I'm like, you should be open to the fact that there could be magical things happening with plants. I mean, and that's a part, the naturopathic profession, as it's grown and try to be incorporated, it's like, I like magic. The bumper sticker, Dr. Stargrove was passed out, keep naturopathy weird, because on some level, once you eliminate magical thinking, then magic won't happen, right? Yeah. Then you're like all cut and dry, and that's where the medical model is. It's like therapeutic dose, and this is it. And I'm like, magical thinking. And I had this with a friend of mine who's rather religious, and they kept talking about, well, I wonder what Jesus has in store for me, and God thinks I'm going to do that. And, religion is magical thinking too. It's like you can't necessarily prove it, but you have a personal experience that it moves you. And I think of the herbs the same way. It's like I have magical moments with plants that can happen. And it's not just, potency. It's like you can have magical moments with chamomile. And I think of it more like there's not so much magical plants as there's magical moments with the plants. Like there's a relationship that you have. And so when you have the relationship with the plant, it oftentimes picks up on your energy. And this is kind of beyond the provable, but I really think that the plants have an ability to like tune into what we want with them. And so when I worked with herb companies making different kinds of herbal medicine, they'd always like, well, could you make it stronger? And like, I'm like, well, we make it in a uniform method so that we can provide what the plant gives us as constituents. It's up to you as the practitioner to make it stronger. And how do you make it stronger? By your relationship with the patient and by empowering them to use this as a tool. And so I think of it a little bit like my analogy now is if you take a stick and a dog, the stick is the problem, the arthritis, and you holding the stick is the practitioner, and the dog is the herbs. And so once you pick up the stick, the dog gets pretty excited. You're like, all right, arthritis, here we are. And the dog's like, yes. And then you throw it, and the herbs are like chasing after the problem. And so if you think about plants just sitting here in this garden, the plants are providing mood. They're interfacing with us whether we know it or not. And I love that concept that Dr. Bill Mitchell said. He said, are we attracted to the plants or are they attracting to us? And it's a two-way street. And so allowing ourselves to have magical moments is, like, I think, human nature.
Yeah.
Like, once all the secrets are revealed, it's hard to have that. And so with herbs, you always have to, and that's the beauty of the herbs, is they go all through that. You can have total scientific thinking and totally magical thinking, and they don't contradict each other. They work with each other. They're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. And I think that the migration of the naturopathic profession is definitely moving away from magic. And because, the general mass population and the insurance companies and the government, they don't really operate in magic world.
No, I think insurance reimbursement does not pay for magical treatments. And so the naturopathic medicine kind of still has their roots in modern shamanism. I first started practicing, and I realized really quickly that if you had a good relationship with the patient, they trust you and they were looking to you for advice, that you could tell them about anything and they would go do it. And that's a strong power to have, right? And so you want to use it judiciously, but it also is like you can work with them to stimulate healing in ways that are non-pharmacological. And it's shamanism. Look at the history of shamanism. There was a professional relationship between the shaman and the villager, and that involved some type of exchange of energy or money or trade. And in some way, the shaman imparted some wisdom to you, some remedy. And so it's built into our DNA that we're looking for somebody to assist our development and healing. I think the thing that herbs work really good is that they can be magic. They can look and smell magic. They have a taste, they have a personality, they have an activity. And so the average person with herbs has an experience with them. Whereas like homeopathy, you can take little homeopathic pellets and you wait to see something happens, but there's nothing kind of organoleptically about it, nothing drawing you in. And so the plants are attractive. They're bringing us in. The scent of the rose, the color of the rose, those kinds of things draw us into the journey. And I think we need help on the way of the healing journey. So something that we can grab a hold of.
Yeah, totally. Could you share a few of your magical experiences with plants?
Magical experience. I'm thinking of linden flowers. I love the linden flowers. They're just finished blooming here, and it's a temperate tropical. So these pendant blossoms. It's in the Malvaceae family, and they're very aromatic and they're very relaxing. It's kind of a relaxing tropical tree that's actually a temperate tree. So in some ways, it kind of be like jasmine or one of these heady tropical. It has a kind of a relaxing, kind of sedating quality. And so one time I was up with a friend in a tree picking. Now, they're very hard to pick because the blossoms are on the end of the branches. And linden trees are historically quite big, but the wood is very soft. So the branches snap really easily. And so you have to kind of get a ladder and go up into the tree to collect it. And so I was in this ladder collecting in the tree, and I was just kind of having a linden moment. I think in homeopathy you'd call it a proving. Like I was surrounded by this heavy sedative smell that just got so strong that I just started getting really tired. On top of it, it really attracts bees because it has wonderful nectar. And so you have all these bees buzzing around like you're afraid to get stung. And literally I said, I'll just take a little nap here on the ladder. Well, that's a bad idea. And so literally I caught myself, when you have those moments where your head drops, like my head was dropping and I was just about to fall 20 feet off a ladder. And then I was like, okay, linden is really wanting me to go down. And there is this historical model with linden where in Europe, especially in Germany, they called it the truth tree. And they would hold court under the tree because they felt that it radiated the ability to be truthful. And then I made the connection where, if you think of when you're relaxed, you tell the truth. To lie takes a lot of energy, right? You have to kind of create a lie and you have to maintain the lie. And relaxing is just like you're going to tell the truth. And so in that moment in the tree, I was just ready to relax. You know, I was probably too tired. And so it just set me into that place. And so those are the kinds of things where you have these moments that you remember like, wow. And one of the things, having taught herbs for years, I kind of feel like mostly I'm telling you stories so that these are my experiences about plants. Go out and have your own story, you know, how you can have a magic moment. Now, it could be magical in like a fantastic way. It also could be kind of frightening. You know, the time I took too much lobelia and I threw up for an hour, you know. It was approving, and I had an intense experience, but I would say it was magical because I really learned the power of that plant. And if you read about lobelia and its history as an emetic and how it was used by Thompson and all his practitioners, they used it as an emetic. And when you read the old text and you said word for word, I experienced that. The nausea, the vomiting, the relaxation, the feeling as if your fingers are tingling all the way out to the tips. You know, you just feel what the old practitioners write about and like, oh, I had that moment. And now I know. And so I think it's a great way to understand a plant is to work with it, to grow it, to harvest it, and then at some point to take it and then keep taking it. And if you take too much, then you understand the toxicity. Like you can take too much ginger, right? You can take too much cayenne. And we can imagine what it might be like, burning and watering. And so that you know the upper limit and then you know the lower limit and you kind of set your boundaries with that plant. I'm not saying going out and to poison yourself with too much of plants, but you will find that happening when you're around plants like, oh, I've taken too much valerian and I just fell asleep in the middle of the day.
I've always loved in class you talking about herbs as being friends, and I know in my life whenever I walk in the woods, I'm always, seeing my friends, and I think that developing that relationship with me and the plants, not that I have that many friends in the natural world, it's still growing. My friendships are still growing, but I think that definitely supports my connection with the plants and also my ability to call upon them when I feel like I need them. They're not just powders and capsules and bottles. They have a home just like us. They grow from the earth just like us. And I think having that connection is really powerful.
Those are what I would call your power plants for you as a practitioner. Like, we could say there's a dozen plants that all you really need to practice well. And those are like having 10 good friends. It's like they each have qualities like, oh, I'm going to call my friend a lawyer when I need some advice, right? And so it's good to have these people in close enough relationships that you can just access them. And I think of the plants of that way. There's something that you can access. And those power plants, like some plants, that you can't connect with everything. And so some things, I don't have an experience with them. Like I can remember working for years with motherwort, and I never really could get like what is motherwort about or how to use it. And then I finally realized it really embraces the concepts of the feminine, and it was just not that accessible to me.
It just wasn't speaking to you.
Yeah, I just don't have the DNA to really understand it a little bit. And so other people could take that same plant and really create some amazing effects. And I know over the years talking to naturopathic colleagues, colleagues would be like, what do you use for this? And I'd say, oh, I use this for this condition. And they're like, well, I know this one colleague was like using blueberry for something. And I was like, blueberry, really? We think of it for the eyes. But she had some other clinical indication that she found really great results. And so what I love about it is it's one plant 100 ways, not 100 plants one way. And that's the drug model. One drug, one way. And the herbs, and this is the hard thing about studying them is and I know medical people and pharmacists have a really hard time. It's one herb 100 ways. So I could give hawthorn berry for 100 different conditions, and it would be right. I might know 3 that I could use it for, but there's still 97 other ways to use it. And so it's falls us to more of the food model of like, how can you use food? Well, you can take peaches and find 100 recipes for them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very cool. Well, could you share maybe a few of your closest friends, your
I mean,
power?
I think the ones are the ones that I can be connected with. And so I think living here in Portland, there's a season for some of the herbs. And so like I love elderflower, the elderflower, like we just made some elderflower syrup that we were having with bubbly water. And, in the spring when that comes on, I mean, the elderberry has a big role, but to me, the elderflower is great because I've moved into this model like where I want my herbs not only to help me, but I want them to be an experience, and so it has to taste and look good. And so what we're drinking today is the purple or the pink elder blossom, which is called the elder purple lace, and it's an ornamental elder which has the purple leaves and the pink flowers, but they're very aromatic and they're still very therapeutic. And if you take the pink blossoms and you soak them in some hot water and add some lemon juice, it turns bright pink because the pigments in there, the anthocyanins in the leaf and in the flower with acids are revealed to be stabilized and they turn pink. And then I take that and depending on how strong you want to make it, add sugar or honey and make a concentrated syrup. And then, 1 teaspoon of the syrup, 6 ounces of bubbly water, stir it up, and you have a flavorful drink that has the properties of elderflower. And elderflower is light, it's uplifting, it brings the blood to the surface, can be used for sweating. And I think of it as an immune modulator. I know the berries thought of even more, but the flower has some of those properties. And it's just great in the middle of winter to take a little elderflower and just smell that early summer headiness. So that's one I love.
Any others that you could rattle off real quick?
I mean, I love...
In here in Oregon?
I mean, the linden, I talked about the linden, being that in Portland there's a lot of linden flowers. That has a very aromatic flower, and that one's really great. I mean, more medicinal, the Oregon grape. The root has that bitterness. Yeah. I've made some really great bitters with Oregon grape, the digestive aspect of that. It's super abundant. And it's really hard to eliminate Oregon grape.
Yeah.
It's pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
Those are some of my highlights.
All right, cool. And on that note, what do you think about people, there's all the Chinese herbs, right? The whole Chinese medicine herbs that are, a lot of them are exotic, grown in other regions around the world, not local. What do you think about using non-local herbs and how compared to, I just have the feeling that I'm going to use the herbs that are around, but shipping, people are shipping herbs across the globe these days. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, everything is a commodity, especially Chinese are selling it because we're a market. And it was never my personal interest because I was too connected to if I can't see it or grow it, how do I know what the herb's supposed to do if I just get dried herb in? I like the life cycle of the plant. And so for me, it was something that I never really got excited about. Uh-oh.
I think that might be overpowering us.
But somebody may love the Chinese herbs and great, let's do it. Yeah. Let's import them or let's use Western equivalents. It just wasn't my path because it's like having a cook and being a cook, but only cooking with Asian food. I'm never going to get the right spices because even if they're sent here, they may not be fresh.
Yeah. So you've talked a little bit about herbs and food, and I've learned about the kind of continuum between herbs and food, and how obviously a lot of herbs are on the spice rack, right? And a lot of it kind of is dose dependent. But could you talk a little bit about bringing herbs into the kitchen and how that might provide any benefit to health and anything like that?
Well,
I don't know if this is too much.
I'll send this guy who's doing the blowing an herbal message. Time to move on. Yeah. Well, herb as food is the way most of the world uses them. If you take spice herbs, and that's your only introduction to herbs, that in itself is such a rich, wonderful And because they so much alter our food and help absorb our food and make us digest our food, the amount you use in spices is very small, but there's a powerful therapeutic effect. And so, this idea that herbs have to be bitter and nasty, I found in practice the model I had is everybody wanted things that tasted better. And so my role as a practitioner was to give them what they needed, but give it in a way that they could be palatable. And so, in the Chinese medicine model, it's kind of the opposite. The nastier it takes, the better the medicine is. Now, that's not a Western culture model. Our patients they want to be babied, they want to be embraced, they want to have something that tastes good. Now, it doesn't mean it has to be like Kool-Aid or soda. You can start with something that they can tolerate. And as they educate their palate, I think most of us as naturopaths, our palates are like, we could take anything, be like, well, that's bitter, but I can appreciate it. And so the herb spices are really a way to start with people, like, especially in digestive health problems. One of the first things I did with one of my teachers, Cascade Anderson Geller, was she made us go home and take all our spices out of the cupboard, first pour them out and fill them up with new ones because they were going to be too old. And then she made us put the scientific name on there and basically saying, you already have a relationship with pepper and ginger and garlic. Let's just acknowledge that and deepen it a little bit. And then after that, you could throw in an Oregon grape or an elderflower. And so coming it from herbs, I kind of came from the medicine end and I backed into the non-medicine end. Now I'm more into the therapeutic drinks and fun, because I think it's for everybody.
Yeah, no, I really love what you're doing in terms of making it fun, making it delicious. I think that's the way that health should be. Health shouldn't be white coat clinic, sterile walls. It should be part of every single day of living. So that's definitely something that I appreciate about what you're bringing to the table.
Well, it just kind of go with your strengths, and I think for me, I'm not a cook, but I'm a foodie on the level that I appreciate. And so when I take one herb, I'm like, we just got to take one herb and just kind of go deeper with it. And like nettles would be another one of my power herbs, like, because they're so abundant here in the Northwest. But, I've experimented with nettles, and like a lot of the breakthroughs come from just messing around with it. And like, I think like Chinese tea is a great context. Is like, how did we get 600 flavor profiles from 4 strains of one plant?
Yeah.
They messed around with it, and they found that you could age it, you could ferment it, you could steam it and dry it and make all different forms. And so that kind of stick-to-itness with the plants you have, I think will serve you much better than like flitting around. Again, figure out 20 plants in your growing environment that you can grow and work with. And that's traditionally with all cultures. And so I'm somewhat of a regionalist because like I asked one of my colleagues, Dr. Ryan Drum, who's one of my teachers and a great mentor and who I just did a class with, I said, Ryan, what do you think about ashwagandha? He knows nothing because he can't grow it or hasn't grown it, and it's not interested in an Indian herb. But he'll tell you about local plants because that's what he's connected with. And I think that's a great regionalism that all traditional cultures have. Now we're a global world. We're fusion herbalists. We blend everything. But you got to know a core of things that you are connected to that you can grow.
Do you think that we can actually do that? Do you think, because I feel like a lot of areas of the world, they're just kind of herb deserts, but maybe they're just herb deserts to me because I don't know the herbs that grow there. Like, I'm from Arizona, in the Southwest, and I know that there's the prickly pear and there's mesquite bushes, but I feel like the Northwest is kind of herbal heaven, right?
Well, we just have so much more water here, and the water makes everything big. I lived in Colorado for 9 years, and it's the Front Range, and it's dry. You have plants there, but they're survivor plants. There'll be less. And part of my movement back to the Northwest was like, I'm more connected to plants than rocks. And Rocky Mountains are rocks. Mm-hmm. And so there's plants there, but it's more of a rock world. And so here there's abundance. And I also lived in the Midwest, and like everything we have here is so big because the growing season is longer, but we're also, because we have the moisture and we have the mycorrhiza and the fungi that support the plants. And so the nettles grow 9 feet tall here, and in the Midwest they grow 3 feet. So there's a difference.
Yeah. So when you were in Colorado, were you using Colorado plants, or?
I always try to bring something from my environment to my practice, and so you could harvest things that you could use, although it's debatable whether there's a legal path to doing that. But again, when you have patients trust, they're fine with taking whatever the medicine they have, whether you made it or not. And there's something powerful in homemade medicine. I mean, that's why when you make your own food and grow your own food and make a meal out of it, it's super powerful because, from soil, what's so big now is the farm to table movement, right?
For sure.
Because people want to be connected to where it came from.
Yeah, I think that's...
Same thing with the herbs.
That's increasingly important in our world today as we disconnect. I think that there's definitely a reconnection movement, which I love personally. And on that note, in the realm of DIY botanical medicine, do you think that it's safe for people to experiment with plants, and how should they do that? And are there some great resources that might help them?
I would say is there any other way? I mean, you have to have some good rules about going out and wild harvesting, and make sure you have a good knowledgeable teacher or a reasonably understanding book. But I think start with the weeds that are growing in your yard and just work with those, ones that are attractive. I take students on an herb walk and show them 10 different plants. They're all going to get, I like this one or this one. And so you get attracted. So pay attention to what you get really attracted to. It's kind of like life. How do people meet their partners? And it's like there's something that attracts you to that person, they attract. And so that's something to pay attention to. I think as practitioner of herbal medicine, what I oftentimes feel like is I'm kind of like an herbal dater. I'm setting people up on herb dates. I'm like, here's that person that's sick, and here's echinacea. Ooh, they're going to have a nice relationship. It's going to be helpful. Not everything sticks, but the ones that you do get excited about are the ones that you really want to take notice. And so, there's all kinds of caveats about what not to take and what not to do. But if you start with things you can buy, dried herbs, or things you can grow in your garden, you start with the spices like basil and garlic and things like that. Can you eat too much garlic? Yes. I've done it. You have a dry mouth for 3 days because it's irritating and drying, but you're going to get through it.
Yeah. No, I think.
And Portland's a great resource. I mean, the internet's loaded with do-it-yourself kind of stuff, and so, find somebody that you think is a good model and follow some recipes, and then go off on your own.
How about any books or materia medicas that you love, or something along those lines?
Well, I've been trying to work on some recipes to create a book, but there is one I just reviewed for the Herbalgram called I think it's called the Herbal Brewer by a guy named Pascal. Is that his first name or last name? Okay. And it's he's a Southern California food and writer and picture, but it's got beautiful experimentations with natural fermentations using herbs. And there's some great recipes in there. I mean, there's so many of these books coming out with people just experimenting, and fermentation is pretty big. The James Green book, the Herbal Medicine Maker's Handbook, which is maybe 15, 20 years old. That's a great how to make herbal tinctures, extracts, like a recipe book. Rosemary Gladstar's books on herbal healing. It's a great introduction to food, and then salves and creams and topical uses. So topical is a great way to get introduced because it's easy. People need for things to put on the skin.
Yeah. Cool, man. I feel like we flew over so many great topics.
Yeah, no, we had some great topics.
Yeah, and part of me kind of wants to skim back over cannabis because I said I would.
All right.
But so maybe we can kind of end in that direction. Being as hot of a topic as it is today, so when it comes to using cannabis, just because it is widely available and becoming more so in our world today, what does the consumer need to know to make because it is direct to consumer kind of stuff we're talking about?
I think the education, and there's so many, people doing the education on the different components of cannabis and what you're looking for. But I think the best model is to just really go slow. And I think the movement in cannabis therapeutically is really going to move to oral or topical and oral, not so much the smoking. And I would say the smoking is the old end, like smoking cannabis or vaping cannabis. And typically that will release so many cannabinoids that it will overload your system and quickly get you too much. And so the model I've often recommended is starting with, depending on what you're looking with, 3 to 5 milligrams of THC and maybe 3 to 5 milligrams of CBD, like a 1-to-1 blend, and then just seeing if the conditions you're working with, most people are doing it for stress and relaxation. I like the 1-to-1 strains because I think the concept is THC is a double edge. I mean, you can get too much, and there's that model that smoking and vaping and the genetics of cannabis have gone so crazy that the breeders have made it so there's strains that are 30% THC. Now, there's no plant of any kind that you can, without manipulating, get more than 3 to 5%, because plants need all these compounds for a different reason. So to make 30% of something, that's like manipulating and stressing, and so if you think of blueberries, they're like 3% antioxidants. So like it's hard to get much higher than that. And so when you manipulate them that way, you can just, that 30% would be like one puff on a vape could be more than you need. And so I think I'm really a fan now of experimenting with low dose therapeutics long term, and the thing that I'm personally working on in the company and the project that I'm working with is I'm looking at using cannabis products mixed with herbal products. And so that we can mix things together that get a synergy from both the botanical end and the herbal end, meaning the cannabis and the herbs. And so like adaptogens with relaxing CBD, stress herbs with CBD, pain herbs with CBD and THC products. And so we're looking to come out with a line of products that puts the therapeutics also with the flavor and taste in mind. So something that has a good flavor and taste. And so that's where putting more of the herbal and the botanical together, because they are one spectrum. Yeah. We're separating them because of the legalities.
For sure. Very interesting. I've always assumed that the whole cannabis plant, in whole plant form, whether it's smoked or, isolate or like compounded and isolate or making a tincture or something like that, I've always assumed that that's the most effective way to treat anything. But, our world has reduced cannabis into the separate components, and two of which are, the CBD and the THC. Right. But there's hundreds, maybe thousands more. What are your thoughts on the isolated compounds and fractions of the cannabis plants as opposed to sticking with a whole plant extract?
Yeah, no, I think the rules are all like I said earlier, like the whole plant may give us things that we need to support ourselves, and then the isolates may be something you need for specific conditions. And so you can go from the isolated mechanics to the native extracts, and all those have value. It just depends on what you need at the time. And that's the beauty of cannabis. It can be reduced to pieces, and those pieces can be valuable, or it can be kept as whole. But I'm not going to be, because things evolve, I'm not going to say like, oh, it has to be one way or the other way. I think there's a movement in the cannabis industry to isolate and concentrate. And so now we have shatters that are like 90% THC. Well, not great. Now we can do that, but like, let's also look at the terpenes. And there's a lot of research on the terpenes being really effective in small doses. So the smell of cannabis and the effects of the terpenes on how it affects the high, because CBD and THC have effects, but I think the terpenes kind of modulate it. And when you read of different strains and they're like this kind of high, it's kind of like reading a wine bottle. A lot of it is just unemployed English majors trying to make a living, but you're also setting people up for an expectation. And so the good thing about it is people can look at a strain and what it might do, and they can say, oh, that's what I want. and then they give themselves permission to have that journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of it is a little fanciful, but some of it is actually helpful.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the terpenes that are going to help us get those effects, the limonene and linalool and other components. And so I think those are the three things we're looking at. But now there's components in the roots. I think we'll continue to mine the cannabis plants for other research. And once we can get into the place where we can do research without being illegal in this country, we're going to find a lot of things coming out about different components of the plant. So right now, we can't do it. We have to import the research, really.
Yeah, very fascinating. I think we're just uncovering the sheet that's hiding maybe a whole lot that we have yet to discover.
Yeah, and that's what I think cannabis is so exciting. Is it's kind of breaking the mold. It's saying, it has this historical whole plant model, but we can also break it down into pieces. We can also find the benefits of the parts, so we can break it apart and we can put it back together in different ways and address many of the health concerns. The whole opioid epidemic, there's a lot of research about cannabis being really helpful for that. I mean, you can debate how addictive cannabis is, and I wouldn't be naive to say that it can't be for some people. But again, in low dose, it's probably not going to get there to people. And so starting people out slow, go low, and just see how it interfaces with their body. Because again, not everybody's going to like the fact. If you get too much THC and you get high, people can get paranoid. They can get very anxious, and that experience can be like, it's not for me. Just like some people don't like hot food, it's not for everybody. But what I think we'll see is that there's solutions for people that we haven't thought of with the other herbs, and don't just throw all the other herbs out just because cannabis is the latest, greatest. The amount of resources going into it, it's like, if you sell nails, then everything's going to look like a hammer, right? And so the model we have now is that cannabis is a solution for everything. And I would just say pull back and let's look traditionally of how it can be integrated. And a fun thing to do is look up in the old Materia Medicas, like the Felter Materia Medica from 1922, and look up cannabis, because they used it as a fluid extract, and look at its indications. And they just had it listed with all the other herbs. And they weren't saying this is the greatest, latest thing. They were just saying this is how it's used. Of course, they were probably dealing with strains that we don't have today, but it's also a historical medicine. And so, you can research it.
Sure. Yeah, like we were saying, it could be kind of the platform from which, botanical medicine can really kind of take off in a new way. And if it were up to you, if you kind of had the power or control to dictate the destiny of how it looked going forward in terms of how cannabis was unfolding into the world, into our world, what would that look like?
Well, I thought of that a lot, having involved myself in this. And I think when I talked earlier about all the herb shops, the few herb shops and all the cannabis shops, I would like to see cannabis move into the herb shops and the solo cannabis shops lessen. Because again, I think the path I talked about earlier was like the alcohol path. Is cannabis going to become like in the liquor stores, like, here you go, so much potentized? Or is it going to go in the healing model? And see, when you look at the herb botanical shops with echinacea, burdock, and dandelion, you're looking at a rich historical tradition of herbal healing, and cannabis is added to that.
Right.
And I would love to see herb shops add cannabis, but not devote the whole store to cannabis. And I think we're moving in that direction, because ultimately we don't need 150 strains of cannabis. We probably need about 6. And as we know more about the genetics and more about the plants, how they apply to conditions. And so could you see an herb shop with 6 to 10 strains of cannabis products and the rest of the herbs, and practitioners, as in naturopathic practitioners, that can help guide people into which tools to use when and the appropriateness of this. So just because it's a big hammer, sometimes you just need a little tap. And so I would love to see cannabis move into an industry where it's still embraced in healing, it's still embraced into rich herbal tradition, and not move into the isolated pharmaceutical model like drugs. So that's the path. Does it stay with herbs, or does it go to drugs?
Yeah.
And we'll see.
We'll see. It looks like it's going to drugs, but
Well,
maybe it can do like both.
I mean,
I don't know.
maybe it can be both, and
Yeah.
that's the beauty, I think, of the industry is that, Oregon has a recreational law. People can grow their own plant, so they still can have a plant in their yard and have a relationship with the plant. And there can be a drug that can help some child who has seizure disorder. That's a concentrate of the CBD from the plant. I think the latest trend really is the CBD products. That's kind of breaking the mold because CBD by itself is not illegal. And so almost all the states have a CBD law where they can sell CBD, but it has to come from industrial hemp. So it leads to another whole issue. But it's breaking the mold on CBD getting out there and being sold in convenience stores. And
All right. We hammered that nail
All right.
home. Hammered that nail home. So I want to end with if there's one thing that you feel like the general population, the masses should know about botanical medicine and herbs, or kind of just a message to hammer home, what do you feel like that could be?
One of my messages is, have have a fun relationship with the plants, so if you're drawn to it, find something that you can just experiment with and don't think of it as the realm of experts. Like, I'm not a physician. I can't mess with those. If you fall into the model of spices, make it fun and make it something that you can do with every day. Every day I have some process that I'm thinking about, like, oh, I should pick this, or I'm making a tea of this. I was just on a class and we harvested seaweed and we made seaweed slime and part of that is in the foam that we had on our drink. It's like, oh, how do we do this? Play with it. So do something every day and it will expand your horizons.
Keep it playful.
Keep it playful. That's the model. It's like, if you want to make it serious and drug oriented, that doesn't sound like something I want to be involved with right now.
Yeah, very, very good point. I'd love to end on that. And how about, are you in the world where people can find you, a website or social media?
I'm working on that, but I'm out there. I have my email is herbalwiseguy@outlook.com.
Herbal Wise Guy.
And that's because there's so many wise women, but we need a few wise guys to keep stirring the pot.
Well, I think you're that one. So thank you so much,
All right.
Dr. Nagel. It's been a pleasure. And peace and love. Thanks for
All
joining.
right, thanks for having me.